Thank you so much for joining me today, Professor Ozalp. Today we'll be talking about the Mongol invasion of the Middle East. So maybe we can kick it off and just give a broad overview of what the Middle East was like prior to the Mongol invasion. What time periods are we talking about? Who was ruling? What's the overall landscape looking like?
We're talking about 600 years after Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the Middle East was ruled, or the entire Muslim world was ruled by Abbasid Empire. First Umayyads and then the Abbasids came in. But about 10th century, it started to crumble into, it was just too big to be governed by a central government. So Middle East was firstly taken over by the Seljuks. Seljuks were these Turkish tribes that came in and dominated captured a lot of the territory. And under Abbasids' tutelage, they governed much of the Middle East. But also their rule was also crumbling. They were replaced by the Khwarezmi Empire, which sort of ruled over Central Asia, Persia, parts of Iraq as well. And we also had the Crusades. The Crusades came in 1095, which resulted in fragmentation of the near Middle East, like Syria, Egypt, and so on. But then that was united by Nuruddin Zengi first, the Zengids, and then Salahuddin also was an important figure. And eventually Salahuddin captures Jerusalem, stabilizes that region. But nevertheless, by 12, 18, and 20, there was stability, but it wasn't the central rule of the Abbasid was gone, long gone.
So it was more like like the Abbasid Caliph was more of a figurehead, and then the Seljuks were ruling. There's also Mamluks right at this time in Egypt. Is that correct?
That's right. The Mamluks were these were the like Turkish tribes or soldiers, which eventually they took over the country and become rulers. The Abbasid Caliphate was interesting because the Abbasid Caliph ruled just on Baghdad and the vicinity. That's all. It did not have a big army. It could not enforce its power across the Muslim world. So it basically ruled by giving sultans legitimacy. We see this with Salahuddin, for example. Salahuddin, in order to get legitimacy, he corresponded with the caliph, received gifts and letters and so on. And then that made Salahuddin a legitimate ruler. So still the Abbasid caliphs were the only all legitimate power came from the caliph, basically. So all local rulers sought and received a flag and gifts and the letters endorsing their rule, and then they felt legitimate. And the people also felt that, oh, okay, this is a legitimate Muslim government that they can live under. So it had a lot of symbolic power, and it represented the unity of the Muslim world as a ummah, not as a political unity, but still there was unity of culture. Islamic law was dominant across this world. Arabic was the dominant language. So it was a civilization, and that civilization was represented by the Abbasid Caliph centered in Baghdad.
Okay, cool. So let's talk now about the Mongols themselves. So how did they rise, like before they invaded the Middle East and like Europe and Central Asia? What are their origins? How did they rise? And what was their motivation to actually expand into the Islamic world and the Middle East as a whole?
It kind of starts with 1206 with Genghis Khan uniting or becoming a tribal ruler, and then uniting various tribes under a larger force. It was all about territory and army. In the Genghis Khan conscripted all male population basically as soldiers, and conquering territory was the means to make a living for these people and to sustain their families. And he was a very powerful leader, very strong, dominant, and powerful. And he was able to unite people, and that's not easy to do. So basically using that, he started conquering territories in Central Asia. Mongolia, the Siberia. We're talking about the currently Western China, the Uyghur territory, which is also Turkic as well. And he came across parts of Central Asia. So he got Turkish tribes on his side as well. And then he launched this massive invasion of China. So Genghis Khan firstly wanted to conquer China, and he's been very much successful in that, almost wiped out Chinese culture and political establishment completely. And so once he conquered this very large territory, he looked at towards the west, and there was several smaller, Asian, not empires, but states that resisted. That eventually he captured, ended those as well, where he became a neighbor to the Khawarizm Muslim world. And what Genghis Khan wanted to do at this point was to revive the Silk Road trade. I mean, you can only live on spoils of war for so long, right? So you gotta obviously hit tax the population and promoted trade. And one of the most important mechanism of trade was the Silk Road. I mean, forget about transoceanic trade, which was very difficult and it wasn't developed at the time. Sending goods from China all the way around the oceans was extremely dangerous, long. So the overland Silk Road trade was the most important one, and that was halted because of all these small states that existed that stopped the trade caravans. It wasn't safe anymore. So by uniting very large geography under his rule, now Genghis Khan could start the Silk Road trade, and he needed the help of the Khawarizm ruler at the time.
Interesting. So his motivation was financial and economic. Was there like a religious component to it as well? Was there like a spiritual? Did they think that they were superior, or was it just purely kind of financial and economical motivations?
With power and money, and control. That was the main driver. The Mongols were shaman, so they did not have any religion that looked for converts, and actually they were very tolerant of different religions like Buddhists, Christians, Muslims could live under their rule. They did not interfere with freedom of religion, which was one of their strengths as well. And they did not have a dominant civilization as such. It was a tribal society, and they quickly learned a lot, uh, but they did not really bring with them a very strong religious or civilizational influence. And in fact, we'll see later on the reverse happened.
And they're mostly kind of nomadic horse archers, right? It's their main kind of like settlement pattern.
Well, it was a nomadic culture to begin with, the tribes, but as they conquered territory, they became settled.
Okay.
And because you have to rule over these big cities, big lands, so you have to have bureaucracy. And they actually adopted the Muslim divan system. A divan system was a very sophisticated bureaucracy, basically recording everything: taxation, populations, and land, and all the correspondence and the transactions that happen, court cases. So this was unheard of at the time. So Muslims really developed a very sophisticated bureaucracy, and Mongols adopted that. They adopted some Persian ones as well, some Chinese. So they did not have any of their really governance. The only thing Genghis Khan really was strong was coming up with laws, and what we call Genghis laws, and but these were very harsh laws. It basically everything was punishable by death almost, but they were very influential, and they kept people at bay.
Okay. So he conquered all these kind of smaller states in Central Asia. now his neighbors, the Khwarezmian Empire. I'm assuming it's called. So they're neighbors. Can you walk us through what happened next? How did the conquest begin, and how did it unfold?
Okay, it kind of begins with late 1218, and Genghis Khan's still busy with the Chinese, sort of stage of war, but he sends about 450 tradespeople or emissaries, basically starting diplomatic and economic relationship with the Khwarezmi Empire. But what happens is that inexplicably, the one of the governors of the frontier cities, Inalchuk, he's infamous for this. Inalchuk actually kills all 450 people. He accuses them of espionage, and well, probably they were suspicious. At the end of the day, Genghis Khan is just going around conquering the whole world, and even the word Cengiz means in Turkish ocean. They believed. At that time, they believed that the whole world was surrounded by this big ocean. There's Africa, Asia, and Europe were the only land masses. And basically, he was the Khan of the entire universal Khan. That's what Genghis Khan meant. And so they were suspicious of all of a sudden what's going on here. But you don't go and kill 450 people. I mean, you need to engage in diplomacy first. And then Genghis Khan sends an emissary, say he's asking for these to be punished, and to the actual Sultan himself, who's Muhammad II at that time is the Sultan, and the Sultan kills the emissary too.
Wow.
So you're asking for it basically. It was
Yeah.
crazy that what they've done. So this angered Genghis Khan naturally, and he's at that time at the peak of his power, and he decides to launch a massive campaign now to destroy the Khwarezmian Empire, and I would think maybe the Khwarezmian Sultan and the rulers there, they overestimated their own strength and maybe underestimated Genghis Khan's resolve. They probably thought, oh well, he's too busy with the Chinese and he's not going to attack us, but he did. So he launches a multi-branch attack on the entire Muslim world. Through the gates of the Khwarezmian Empire, and within 2 years destroys the entire Khwarezmis are no more in 2 years.
Wow. Is there any standout battle or event that you can tell our listeners about? I hear he just wiped out entire cities that still haven't recovered to this day, and those were kind of jewels of Islam at the time, and now they're kind of ruins.
That's right. Well, he first begins by sieging Bukhara, and followed by Samarkand. These were the two most important centers in Central Asia. Imam Bukhari comes from there. They were very important centers of trade, culture, and Islamic development as well, Islamic scholarship. So the cities like Herat, Merv, Nishapur were destroyed. Basically, they lay siege to a city. If they resist and they conquer the city, they basically wipe out the entire population. Entire population, meaning all males are killed. The elderly are killed. Women and children are enslaved. And they did not kill the craftsmen, the artisans, by the way. So this is really important later on in the conversion of the Mongols to Islam as well, because artisans were really valuable people. They had skills, so they could make stuff that the Mongols themselves needed, and it's not very easy to develop a masterful artist. So they did not touch them. They took them, enslaved them, took them with them into Mongol territories, and they were utilized. And what better people to take with you than the artisans, because these were very sophisticated people. They knew how to treat their customers. They had a lot of knowledge. And in the Muslim world, the artisans were organized under guilds. They have codes of conduct. So they were really present-day professional people. You've got doctors, engineers these days. They go around the world, they're hired by these transnational companies. So it was a bit like that. And they were really influential in the conversion of the Mongols later on. But put that aside, so everyone else was just useless. Fighting men, they could all fight back, so they were slaughtered. And this terror tactic was really influential because they went to the next city. Do you surrender or do you want to resist? If you resist, this is what's going to happen to you. And I mean, some cities resisted, of course, and they were destroyed, but many other cities just surrendered. So it was very quick in that respect. Within a couple of years, the conquest of Central Asia, Khorasan, and Persia, the present-day Iran, was almost complete. Iran, by the way, at that time was still Sunni. It was a very important Sunni center in the Muslim world. And Persian was the dominant culture. Arabic was the language of law, religion, and trade, but culture was dominated by Persians at that time.
Interesting. So he conquers this. It sounds like a massive empire from kind of Kazakhstan to Persia, and now he's at the gates of the Abbasids in Iraq. What
Yeah, just
unfolds?
the death toll. I think the death toll is really important. Like Muslim sources give as much as 5 to 7 million people being killed. But late scholarship has put it down to around 1.5 million. But 1.5 million still, by standards of that day, is probably 20% of the population.
In a year and a half. Yeah, that's crazy. And I heard a story. I don't know how true this is, that they would destroy a city, leave, and then come back after 2 days and kill anybody who was kind of like a strangler, and also kill the cats and the dogs. Is there any truth to that, or is that just a bit of a myth?
Well, this is a bit of a myth. They deliberately spread this kind of news themselves because they wanted people to be scared and terrorized so that they surrender. And that was the only thing. They did not say, we'll kill you no matter what. If you surrender, we won't touch you, and you'll be able to practice your religion. You'll have freedom. We're just gonna the government will change. That's all. But if you do resist, this is what's gonna happen. Your cats and dogs are not even safe. So those are exaggerations, and spread by also Muslims as well themselves. But it was really part of the Mongol psychological warfare as well.
Okay, so now they're up against the borders of the near Middle East, of Iraq and Syria, and the Abbasids, and the different varying states that are ruling over kind of the rump state of the Abbasids. Can you walk us through what's next? What happens next? Does he send more emissaries, and are they killed, or is it more of a tactful invasion?
Well, in 1222, Genghis Khan himself focuses on other things after completing that conquest. But there is a lot of resistance as well at that time, especially the son of Muhammad II, the Khawarizmi Sultan, Jalaluddin Kharzemshah is famously known as. He launches very effective resistance, and he actually defeats some Mongol armies in Afghanistan and other places as well. So it's not all whitewash coming in. But eventually, Jalaluddin Kharzemshah loses a major battle in Battle of Indus, and he just escapes after that and tries to launch resistance here and there, but eventually, he is also killed. But he was a very religious person, and really used the jihad kind of a concept to fight the Mongols, to rally Muslims and to fight against the Mongols. And he's famously known to say, like when some of his generals said to him, "We'll be victorious, aren't we?" And he says, "I don't care. My job is jihad or fighting. It's up to God to give us victory or not. If He gives victory, we're thankful. If He doesn't, we continue fighting." So he was a very sophisticated and well-respected ruler, and even Genghis Khan himself respected him and forbade killing him outright. I mean, he was killed not by Mongols, by others. So I think that's worth noting, that there were really serious resistance as well. It wasn't just a walk in the park for Mongols as well.
I had no idea. I was always under the assumption that the Mongols just beat everybody until they reached Egypt, basically, and then the Mamluks gave them their first defeat. But we can talk about that later on. Actually, before we talk about the invasion of the Abbasid world, can we talk about the position of the Abbasid world and the Muslim world in general in the world? Because it's you always hear that this was the end of the Islamic golden age. How Baghdad was the center of learning; it had the house of wisdom. So can we kind of draw that picture to our listeners and talk about the eminence of the Muslim world and the Arab world at this time?
Sure. Well, Baghdad was established by the Abbasid in 762. So it was built from scratch as a city. It was called a round city. It started like that and then just spread out. And it's been the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate since then. And it's developed into a population of 1 million people, they say. At that time, it was the biggest city in the world for a long time. And naturally, a city like that attracted a lot of people, smart intellectuals, artists, and all. So it also became a seat of civilization in the Muslim world as well. A lot of learning took place where this house of wisdom was a famous library established in the palace of the caliph. But it wasn't the only library. It became the archetype of many other libraries that were established, where books were collected and translated. Books from, Hindu, Persian, the Hellenistic, civilizations were translated into Arabic. So for the first time in Muslim the world history, actually, the entire knowledge of the world was made available in one language. And at the same time, paper began to be used. Paper, prior to the paper, books were written but on animal skin or parchment. Parchments were wasn't good, but animal skins was very expensive. So paper technology made it possible to produce books at a large scale, much cheaper than before. So basically, it was like the internet, invention of internet, how it revolutionized our world. At that time, the humanity took a massive leap through Arabic language or all these translations, paper, production of books being made available in libraries where people can borrow and come and read. And we're talking about like thousands of manuscripts in each library at a time when Europe had only maybe about 10,000 books all up in the entire continent. So this was a massive civilizational output and representation in the whole world and the Muslim world at the time. So Baghdad represented that. And there were, of course, other centers like Cairo, Syria, like Damascus, and so on. But Baghdad was the main center.
Okay, so now the Mongols are at the gates. What happens next?
Well, it doesn't happen immediately. So in like 1222 is when Genghis Khan kind of stops, says, "This is done. We've taken our revenge and we've conquered another huge territory. That's enough." And then there is no more conquest until 1258. So there's a fair bit of distance, like time gap there. And what happens is the Genghis Khan empire kind of splits into different regions ruled by his sons and later grandsons. And one of those in the southwestern part becomes the Ilkhanate Empire, and or is ruled by Genghis Khan grandson, who's Hulagu. It's established in 1256. So he gains power. So he's now trying to look for expanding his territory and power. He was quite a powerful ruler as well. So he puts his eyes on Baghdad, and I have a video on that on our channel, Isra Academy channel, on the fall of Baghdad, which I treat that very long, quite a bit. I'll refer that listeners to that particular video for details. But the Abbasid Caliph underplays the risk and the danger. When this army is coming, he downplays it. He doesn't prepare. His advisors, his vizier, gives him wrong advice, saying, you'll be all right. The Muslims will come and save you. How are they going to come and save you when you don't do anything? You don't even correspond, with these rulers and ask them for support. Just do some organizing. He doesn't. And then Hulagu lays siege to the city. Well, again, he asks for surrender. The Caliph doesn't surrender. Some of the influential people, like the rich people and the people of position, come with it as a group and go to Hulagu asking for pardon, and they get killed. And, Hulagu comes and destroys the city. Basically, the entire city is sacked. Perhaps half the population is killed. The numbers are given sometimes between 100,000 to 500,000, and it's staggering by all measure. This is a bit of an exaggeration, but the writers, the chroniclers at the time, say the river Euphrates flew ink and blood for days.
Yeah,
to refer to the carnage of, I guess, killing of the population and throwing of the books into the river. Not all the books were thrown. There was, smart people in the army who collected some of these manuscripts and took them away. But House of Wisdom was destroyed. The Caliph, the Abbasid Caliph, was killed, wrapped in a carpet and trampled upon them and burned, because they believed that they should not be killing or shedding the blood of a ruler, for there was some superstition in the Mongols. And only one descendants of the Caliph escaped to Egypt, which kind of became the Mamluk Caliphate from there on. But yeah, the whole city is destroyed, and Baghdad have never recovered since that time. And then the entire civilization of Muslim world shifts to the west after that, like Egypt, Syria, and we'll later on Anatolia or present-day Turkey with the Ottomans. Baghdad only became a shadow of itself after that.
So this is like a seismic event in the Muslim world or in the world at large. This is the largest city in the world. Let's say New York or Tokyo today gets hit by something that kills half the population. That must have sent reverberations around the Muslim world and in Europe. What were the reactions? Did Muslims try to come to the aid of the city? Were the Turks, were the Mamluks, were the other people in the region? Did they come and try and support the Khalifa and the Caliphate, or was it just every man for themselves?
They couldn't. Muslim world was fragmented at that time. I mean, just the entire Persia, Khorasan was previously conquered by the Mongols. And that was the main source of manpower for the Abbasid Caliphate. So that's a really important aspect. The Abbasid Caliph was the Eastern Empire. The Umayyads were mainly Arab, or they drew their strength from the Arab tribes. The Abbasid they took their strength from the Khorasan, the Persian tribes and the peoples. So that was the disadvantage. And at that time also Ayyubids, like Salahuddin is gone. So Ayyubids were in power, but some of the descendants of Salahuddin was not very good. So basically, there was no immediate available forces that would come to the aid and really challenge the Hulagu. But there was a challenge, of course. Like the Hulagu actually intended to conquer the entire Middle East. He did not just stop at Baghdad. He did advance west. But one main opposition came from Mongols themselves, Berke Khan. Berke Khan was the ruler of Blue Horde, which is basically the western end of the Mongol Empire, or this is the Ukraine area, Ukraine or north of Black Sea. So it's a bit distant to bring help very quickly. But Berke Khan actually warned Hulagu not to attack Baghdad. And he said, if you do, I will take revenge, because he was a Muslim at the time.
Interesting.
So Berke Khan is the first Muslim Mongol ruler at the time. And then what he does is that he corresponds with Mamluks in Egypt, and they put together a coalition force. And in 1260 or 61, there's this battle of Ain Jalut, which is in Syria, where Hulagu is defeated. So that's the first major defeat of the Mongol forces. So then they really withdraw to east. So at least what that means is that Syria, Egypt, and Arabia are at least safe from the Mongol invasion at that time.
So they conquer Iraq. They try to go to Syria. I was under the impression it was the Mamluks alone. I've never heard of this. The other Mongols supporting the Mamluks. I guess the Mamluks have very good PR. Did they ever go to Anatolia, or was that also kind of off limits for them?
Mongols did enter eastern Anatolia, but there was also resistance from the Anatolian Seljuks. So Seljuks, although collapsed by the Khwarizmis, but in Anatolia, or the present-day Turkey, they were still very strong, and they had an independent government there. So they were able to hold the Mongols, at least at some bay. But when Hulagu had that defeat, he had to withdraw, basically to stabilize his empire. Because once a ruler in the medieval world gets defeated, everyone else gets the courage to resist, rebel. So you had to go back and stabilize. So Muslim world was safe for now.
And I read somewhere that there was a period of, I don't know how many years, where the Ottoman Empire stopped existing for a short amount of time. Is this true? And I think it happened because of the Mongols. Can you talk about that a little bit?
That's later on. That comes in around 1402.
Okay, so that's
when
later.
The Ottoman Sultan Bayezid loses to Tamerlane. Tamerlane was a Ilkhanid ruler or descendant, but he was Muslim by that point. The Ilkhanids become Muslim by the ruler, the Khan Ghazan, converts to Islam in 1295, and from there onwards, they actually become legitimate Muslim rulers, and they spread Islam deep in Asia. Like Mongols, after they converted, they actually spread Islam into Asia, to territories that Islam did not spread before.
Yeah, we can talk about that in a little bit. I just want to ask about
just on that Ottoman, when Bayezid lost in 1402, there was a 10-year kind of a period where Ottomans did not have a sultan, but they had the sons and the descendants had the regions. Like, it didn't collapse completely, but later, about 10, 11 years later, another sultan came in, and then they didn't look back after that.
Interesting. So that's a nice kind of continuation and gap between the Abbasids and the Ottomans. What was the aftermath of the sack of Baghdad? Did the Mongols stay in Mesopotamia and Iraq, or did they kind of withdraw back to Persia? What were the everyday lives?
No, they stayed. They stayed at Baghdad for a long time, and Baghdad became the Ilkhanid part of the Ilkhanate world, but it lost it. It was no longer a capital. That's the thing. And once a city loses its capital nature, it means the army doesn't reside there. When the army doesn't reside and the bureaucracy doesn't come in, all this population
Yeah.
doesn't, it just leaves the city and just left to the ordinary population, and it just completely dies down after that. So that's Baghdad. It was still an important trade junction at that point. There were still scholars coming out of Baghdad, but nowhere near what it had before.
And then what did the Mongols do then? What was their practice for 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 governing these new territories? How did they integrate with the local population? Did they start speaking Persian, for example, and adopting kind of Middle Eastern customs, or did they stick to their Mongolian roots?
No, they did not change their language, but the bureaucracy was Persian, and they used the people and the language and because all the records were kept in the divan system that I mentioned earlier, and they were tolerant to other religions, but once they became Muslim, at least in the southeast and the western part, they promoted Islam, they sponsored Islam just like any other Muslim ruler. So at that point, they become assimilated into Islamic civilization once they become religion. So they just become another ethnic or another nation. So, but it's not just another nation. There's a massive shift in the Muslim world in 13th century, chiefly as a result of, firstly, by Seljuks coming in, but chiefly because of Mongols and the Turks that came with it. The Muslim world shifts to a Turkic world. This is a very important shift. And also, we shouldn't forget that as Mongols were coming in and destroying these cities, large populations were migrating. There was huge migrations taking place, and a lot of the Turks came and settled in Anatolia, the present-day Turkey, which one of those tribes was the Ertuğrul Bey, whose son Osman forms the 1299, the Ottoman state. And then they expand first west into Europe, and then into Middle East by 15th century, and they become one of the largest empires established in the Muslim world, and dominant as well. So, and then in Iran, Safavids emerged. In India, the Muslims in India, the Mughals emerged. Like Mughals were also descendants of the Mongols. So basically, Mongolid and or Turkic leaders dominate the Muslim world from then on. So this is the third era in the Muslim world. We could sort of split it into four eras. The first era is the Arab era, I guess, with the Prophet ﷺ, the Umayyads, and Abba kind of dominate that first era, first couple of centuries. And then comes the Abbasid era, which is kind of Arabic, but still Persia is integrated. And so the Muslim world and Islamic civilization becomes like Persian Arabic mixture, and it's very kind of universalist as well. But after the Mongols, particularly, and then after them, Ottomans, Turkishness comes in. Turks come in and became a major influence. And Memluks were Turks, by the way, as well.
Yeah.
In Egypt. So Turkish culture and civilization is adopted and assimilated into the Islamic world. So that's the third main era, which lasts for about 400 years after that. And then comes the modern era in the last 200 years, which is completely different. I guess it's a bit of a decline as well. But those times, like 11th, like 11th, 12th, 13th centuries are known as a bit of a decline period. Initially, there's this huge territorial, military, economic dominance of Muslims. and then it sort of declines with the Crusades, Mongol invasion. There's also Black Death, is a major destructive force, comes in at that time. But then they sort of bounce back with this new Turkic influence and leadership of the Muslim world with Ottoman Safavids and the Mughals, especially in 16th century. It's a very golden era in the Muslim world in terms of civilization and then territorial dominance as well. And the Islam at that point in 16th century reaches its widest, most widespread geography as well by then. So it's a seismic shift. The Mongols cause. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. These things, but about a century. It takes about a century as well. I should also point out there's a huge religious shift as well. One that, and this is when Sufism becomes dominant in the Muslim world as well in 13th century, because you got Crusades, Black Death, Mongol invasion, a lot of destruction, killing. So people needed spiritual solace. They needed to turn to God for support and religion for support, and Sufism provided that. And Sufi orders they organized, charities, local level, help people, individuals, regions, wherever they went. They also went to different cities, sometimes in dangerous locations, and really spread the religion as well. So Sufism dominated. This is when 1240 Ibn Arabi dies, 1273 Rumi dies. Like these Naqshbandis emerge in the 13th century. Like it's also the 13th century is the golden era of Sufism. A lot of the famous Sufi masters live in that time.
That's so interesting. So it's a very, very dynamic time for the Islamic world in general. I've always thought about it as the end of this golden age of Islam, but it sounds like things were quite more dynamic and interesting even after the end of the quote unquote Islamic golden age. Do you think do you think
There are
culturally
golden ages. There were three golden ages, I would say. The time of the Prophet and the companions, from a religious perspective, and the revolution that they introduced to the world, the Abbasid golden age, and then the Turkic golden age, which is the 16th century Ottoman Safavids and the Mughals.
are the Safavids Turkic?
They were Turkic, yeah. They ruled over Iran. They became Shiite later on, and they are responsible to make Iran largely Shiite, actually.
Yeah.
But they were Turkic.
Yeah. Interesting. So what's the third golden age about? If the first one's about kind of religion, the second one's about, like culture and science, the third golden age is what?
Well, trade, civilization, art, and also expansion of Islam into new territories, like deep into Africa, deep into India, even Indonesia or the Oceania, Thailand, like those Southeast Asia, spread into the Uyghurs became Muslim on that time frame. So it was the widespread spread of Islam in the world that. So just think about this, right? The world at the time, America doesn't exist, or we don't know that it exists. Australia doesn't exist. So you've got Africa, Europe, and Asia. And then in that three continents, the civilization belt is Mediterranean, Middle East, India, and China. So like south of Africa are underdeveloped. I mean, in North Asia, it's too cold, sparsely populated. So a lot of the population and civilization exists in this belt, and Muslims were the most dominant force of that belt by 16th century. But obviously, later on, what happens is the Europeans, especially after fall of Constantinople in 1453, they start looking at West for trade, basically to go to India, bypassing the Muslim world and all the cost of that. So if they could go to India in a western route or around Africa, then they can buy pepper very cheaply and sell it with huge profit rather than go through the middleman of the Muslim traders. So basically that need propelled Europeans to around Africa, and they had access to Indian Ocean, and that changed everything. I mean, it wasn't a fast change, but it did eventually brought Europeans, and then the rise of the European civilization and the decline of the Muslim world.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much, Professor Ozalp. Is there anything else that we missed that you think we should talk about? Is there anything you think our readers should be reading or looking into? I'm gonna post a link to the video that you mentioned about the sack and the siege of Baghdad. But is there anything else that you think we should be talking about?
I think we covered just about everything, and this was a really good discussion on the invasion of the Mongols of the Muslim world, which maybe I should sum up by saying that, Islam has this uncanny ability to conquer its own conquerors. The Mongols are a good example of that. They wanted to conquer the Muslim world, but they ended up being conquered by Muslims
That's very That's
and Islam. Eventually.
It's poetic. Is there any books or articles you think our listeners should be reading?
Oh, there's just too many to mention. So there's just Google a lot of books on Mongols themselves or the Muslim world. Maybe we could. They'll find a lot available online.
Great. Well, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, Professor. And
no worries. It's my
I think
pleasure.
it's been extremely useful and insightful to our audience. Thank you.